Now that you've had a chance to work with NURBS surfaces and do a little NURBS modeling, I'm going to move on to polygon surfaces. The first place to start with polygons is just to discuss how they're different from NURBS surfaces and what the polygon surfaces' unique qualities are. For instance, on the screen here I have a polygon primitive cube and then a NURBS primitive cube. Now if you select them by the hierarchy type, they look identical. Again, here's a NURBS on the left and here's a poly on the right. Yet the NURBS surface requires 6 different NURBS surfaces to make a cube. Remember, NURBS have to be based on 4-sided surfaces. In other words, any kind of complex model made with NURBS has to be made out of 4-sided surfaces. You can pinch some of the edges or pull some of the edges together like for a cylinder, but at the end of the day, they still have to be based on a square or rectangle. Hence, you have to have 6 different surfaces. The polygon, on the other hand, is a single surface. Polygons do not have that limitation. You can make very complex models out of a single polygon surface. And a polygon can go in all sorts of different directions. In other words, the surface faces can flow in all sorts of different directions where you have that limitation with NURBS. Since we're talking about NURBS, though, let's look in the hypergraph so we can see how that cube is constructed. Window hypergraph, hierarchy. And in fact, here's the NURBS cube primitive, and there are the 6 different NURBS surfaces that are required. And they're all grouped together, and that group is provided by the primitive tool. And here's the polygon cube, a single surface, a single node in this case, or at least a single transform node, whereas the NURBS cube has 6 transform nodes. So the polygon can be more complex, yet have a single node or at least fewer nodes. Now, with the NURBS cube, you can move those individual surfaces around. That might be an advantage, or it might not be an advantage. You have to remember that if you do want to move it as a single unit, you have to pick it by the group node, or at least make sure you're on select by hierarchy up here in the status line. If you try to select by object type, you'll get the individual sides or top or bottom. The polygon cube you can pick as a single object and you're ready to go. Now, one disadvantage of polygon surfaces is they're not as smooth as a NURBS surface might be. In other words, you have to work harder to make a polygon surface as smooth as a NURBS surface. To demonstrate that, I want to create a couple spheres. So I'm going to get rid of these. I'll just delete them. Well, let's start with a polygon sphere. There's a polygon. And then I'll create a NURBS sphere. There's a NURBS sphere, and I'll move the NURBS aside. Now they have roughly the same curvature. They're equally as smooth in this case. Yet the NURBS surface, which is on the right here, requires far fewer subdivisions and much less mathematical information than the polygon. The polygon sphere, you can see, has quite a few faces, and the faces are these little rectangular patches. So you can see that the polygon sphere requires more subdivisions. The NURBS sphere requires fewer to give you roughly the same amount of curvature. In fact, if you dial in close enough, you can start to see what's called the faceting on the polygon, where you can see the flat transitions of those faces. In other words, it's not perfectly smooth here. You have flat face, flat face, flat face. So that faceting you get is something you always have to struggle with polygon models. You have to make sure you have high enough density in important areas to make the model appear smooth enough for the project you're working on. Now, there is a secret about NURBS, and that is NURBS are converted to polygons at the point of render. So as you model a NURBS surface, you're dealing with the curves, surfaces based on those NURBS curves. However, when you go to render it, the renderer on its own discretely converts it to polys so it can render it out. Now, what it does is it actually subdivides the NURBS surface even further in anticipation of going to polys, because polys aren't as smooth. But occasionally, you do have to increase the subdivisions on the NURBS surface to make it smooth enough. But generally, by default, if you have enough curves to make your NURBS surface, if you're building a custom one, you're generally pretty well off, where you have to worry about your subdivisions more often with polygons. Now, we're going to talk about various polygon components in more detail in a later video.